After not seeing him for a month, John just thrust a divorce lawyer's business card at me without even asking, "Are you okay, or how are you feeling?" Divorcing a wife who doesn't work. Pay me $1,000 a month as alimony. Sounds good. Take care. John chuckled as he said this. Standing beside him, Emily was wrapping her arm around his, wearing a similar smug expression. Fine, let's divorce then. I said it so casually that John seemed a bit surprised, but he quickly shared a smile with Emily. Good thing John isn't much of a thinker. It makes my plan easier to execute. After the divorce papers got approved, I decided to start my revenge plan on both of them. I will make them cry as a celebration of my recovery. My name is Sarah Wolf. I'm a 47-year-old illustrator. I also work as a children's book author. I just love drawing. I have 2 childhood friends, John and Emily. They're important friends to me, and John is also my husband. It all started when John asked me out as I was heading to a different college after high school. I was surprised. I'd thought he was into Emily. But I couldn't say no to a confession from John, whom I had secretly liked. After some thought and consultation with Emily, I accepted John's proposal. Emily's behavior had been a bit problematic since her teens, but she was still a dear friend to both John and me. However, Emily had a tendency to snatch other people's boyfriends and then dump them once they became obsessed with her, causing problems time and again. Her parents were concerned, so John and I often spent time with her to watch over her. John and I got married when we were 25. 4 years later, Emily brought her fiancé into our lives. His name was George, a professional working for a top-tier company. Nice to meet you, Sarah and John. I've heard so much about you. Looking forward to our future together. George was very polite and we all got along immediately. We would get together during holidays and vacations, taking trips or going on long train rides to enjoy some drinks. However, things started falling apart. After Emily got pregnant 2 years into her marriage. John and I originally had many siblings, so there was no worry about an heir, so we decided we didn't need children. Both of us loved kids, but weren't keen on actively caring for them. Besides, we loved our freedom to travel and enjoy drinks. We often found it heartwarming to see families with children, but it was never more or less than that. When Emily announced her pregnancy, John's attitudes started to change. He quit smoking because Emily said she couldn't stand the smell, and even offered to drive her to doctor's appointments using his vacation days. I warned him. George might get upset if you're always with Emily. But John argued back. You have work, don't you? She's our childhood friend and she's reaching out for help. You're heartless. I said. I've been buying things and helping where I can, but going with her to the obstetrician is crossing the line. When I said that, John frowned. And then, he glared at me. Why? Because Emily wants it, right? She says she's anxious about the checkup. I can't just let her go alone. If she's anxious, all the more reason for George to go with her, right? If you go with her every time, it's almost like you're the father of the baby in her belly, John. Jealous? You're not gonna get pregnant anyway, so what's the problem? He didn't take my concerns seriously, and instead started to snap, saying I was being annoying. We'd hardly ever had a fight during our marriage, but things changed when Emily got pregnant. Our arguments increased. And that didn't change even after Emily gave birth. In fact, John started spending even more time with Emily and their child, Emma. But when Emma was 6, an incident occurred. It had to do with the attendees of Emma's graduation ceremonies. The day before the graduation, John suddenly started rummaging through the closet. John, what are you doing? Have a meeting tomorrow? John's workplace had a casual dress code, but there was a rule to wear a suit during client meetings. So, he always kept a few suits ready, but they were all thrown on the bed now. No. Just trying to decide what to wear for the graduation ceremony. What? You're seriously thinking of attending the graduation? Yeah, George can't make it, Emily asked me. Wait. That's absurd, no matter how you look at it. I inadvertently raised my voice in denial. Immediately, John's face turned sour. I knew he occasionally picked Emma up from kindergarten, and I had done so myself when asked. Yet, it was nonsensical for a childhood friend, who wasn't even a biological parent, to attend a graduation ceremony. What, you still doubt me and Emily? I'm disappointed that you can't even help out. That's not the point. Anyway, I'm attending the graduation tomorrow, so iron a shirt properly. John said that and abruptly ended the conversation, leaving me behind and going to the bedroom. I had no choice but to call Emily. Hello, Emily? About tomorrow. Sorry about tomorrow. I'm borrowing John. But, won't George be upset about the graduation attendance? Sarah, what are you talking about? Obviously, I haven't told George that the graduation is tomorrow. I'll tell him after the ceremony. I was shocked to learn that George didn't know about the graduation schedule. Upon further questioning, it seemed that Emily hadn't informed George about any of the kindergarten events so far, and John had been acting as the father at the kindergarten, which made me dizzy with its selfishness. Wait a minute, Emily, isn't that extremely unreasonable? It's disrespectful to George, and just because he's a childhood friend. What's wrong, Sarah, you're scary. Well, see you tomorrow. Wait, Emily. I was trembling with anger at Emily, who unilaterally hung up the phone. Still, in the end, I ironed a shirt, prepared a tie, and the next morning, saw John off to Emma's graduation ceremony. Since then, Emily and John started going out more frequently, from once a month to once a week, and then to 3 times a week. Eventually, even George seemed to have some suspicions, and one day, while John and Emily were out, he visited our house alone. I'm sorry for visiting you late at night. There's something that's been bothering me. Is it about the 2 of them? Yes, I would like you to take a look at this. George showed me the GPS history he had installed in Emily's car. It showed that she had been staying at a hotel 3 times a week. All of those days, she was out with John, and just by looking at George's face, I understood what that meant. What do you want to do, George? I want to take revenge on those 2. Me too. I can't forgive them for betraying us after all this time. We started planning our revenge on them secretly. First, I started by increasing my income. Because I had been saving by doing housework and taking care of Emma, my income had drastically decreased. George switched to working from home. And when Emily and John would go out, he would bring Emma to my house, and we would take care of her together. Neither Emily nor John realized that we knew about their relationship, and we were able to gather solid evidence. Once we had collected enough evidence and were ready to take our revenge, we discovered a shocking truth about Emma. George and I struggled with the decision, but we both agreed that we didn't want to hurt young Emma, so we decided to wait until she was an adult to take our revenge. However, even though we decided to endure for 10 years, I was struck with a serious illness. I needed long-term hospitalization, and even at best, I wouldn't be discharged for at least 2 years. Although I could work from the hospital room, it was certain that I would have to reduce my workload. After informing George about the situation, I consulted John. However, John's reaction was no different from when we were making small talk. I'll visit you once in a while. I felt that John no longer had any affection for me, as he didn't even ask about my condition or the name of the disease. In reality, John only visited once a month or once every 2 months. And after Emma's 15th birthday, she started acting strangely. Although she used to visit me almost every day right after I was hospitalized, she became distant after her 15th birthday. However, neither George nor I could figure out why, and we were puzzled. Even when we asked Emma, she just said, "Don't worry about it." However, we ended up learning the reason from John, who rarely showed up. Hey, it's been a while. Yeah, it has. John, who had completely transformed into a flashy appearance, walked in without even knocking. After not seeing him for a month, John just thrust a divorce lawyer's business card at me without even asking, "Are you okay, or how are you feeling?" Divorcing a wife who doesn't work. Pay me $1,000 a month as alimony. That's the deal. So, take care, John said, grinning from ear to ear. Beside him, Emily wrapped her arms around John's with a similar expression on her face. Fine, let's divorce then. I casually agreed, which seemed to surprise John for a moment, but he quickly exchanged smiles with Emily. It was good that John wasn't the type to think too deeply. That's why my plan worked so well. After receiving a notification that the divorce was finalized from John, I decided to start my revenge plan against the two of them. I will make them cry as a celebration of my recovery. I promptly started to take action. First, I contacted George to transfer hospitals. Then, I informed my lawyer that they would be mediating between the two parties from now on. George also began to act at the same time. He moved near my new hospital with Emma. And he started to visit me frequently. Emma still had a gloomy expression, but I was happy that she came to see me every day. Most of my belongings were already in the hospital room, so I told John to dispose of the rest. I didn't want to bring anything that the two of them might have touched into my new life. Once the hospital transfer and George and Emma's move settled down, I received a call from John. I had only left my seat for a few minutes, but my smartphone already showed 30 missed calls. I answered the phone, feeling exasperated. What? Hey, what the hell is going on? I could hear the voice of a troubled real estate agent behind John's panicked voice. I also heard Emily yelling, which made me feel sick. What do you mean, what's going on? It's obviously about the house. Why do we have to move out? John shouted at me as if it wasn't his fault at all. I replied to him coolly. Obviously, because that's my house. Huh? John seemed to have completely forgotten, but the truth was, the house we lived in was a room I rented as a workspace when I started to make a living as a freelancer. At that time, I didn't have enough income to maintain two houses, and John didn't have enough income to live alone. So, he ended up moving into my place. Therefore, John had never paid the rent or utility bills for that room. Although I received some money from him for living expenses, it wasn't enough to maintain the place. Unfortunately, that room was already cancelled. It was far from the hospital I transferred to, so I had processed the cancellation the day after submitting the divorce papers. I didn't inform him because the real estate agent, who knew the situation, said they would contact him. George and Emma suddenly disappeared, and our house was sold. What are we gonna do about our new house? I don't know. Maybe stay in a business hotel for now? As I turned on the speaker and started working, John yelled in frustration. Don't screw with me. However, he seemed to remember something and started speaking in a more soothing tone. Well, whatever. When will you transfer the money? We're running low on cash. What are you talking about? Huh? Don't mess around. I told you to pay $1,000, didn't I? Oh, I don't recall agreeing to that. My nonchalant response was met with incoherent screaming from John on the other end of the phone. Apparently, he thought he could get money from me and had been squandering it. Even if he had $1,000 left, how did he plan to get by for the rest of the month? Hey! Don't just stay silent, say something. There's really nothing to talk about. My retort left John momentarily dumbfounded, but he soon started yelling again. Growing increasingly annoyed, I addressed John in as cheerful a tone as I could muster. Anyway, we're basically strangers now, so please don't contact me anymore. You'll hear from my lawyer. Huh? Lawyer? Hey, wait a minute. I hung up without listening to John's response. He tried calling back several times, but I ignored it, and eventually, the calls stopped. However, angry that I didn't answer, John started ignoring calls from my lawyer. He certainly had a childish side, but I never imagined he'd be the kind of person who didn't mind causing trouble for others. I sighed deeply at John's selfishness. A few months later, after a temporary discharge from the hospital, I visited John's parents' house. In front of me were John and Emily, both looking small and trembling. You telling my parents is a low blow. Oh, I just reported that we got divorced. John glared at me in response to my answer, but he shrank back under his father's stern gaze. Actually, I had a great relationship with my in-laws, even visiting and dining with them when John wasn't around. Despite being so well loved, I felt it was wrong not to share the details of our divorce, so I went to visit them. Is it true that you're remarrying Emily? Yes, it's true. Emily, Emma, and I are going to start over as a family. What are you talking about? Your only family is Sarah. She's not my family anymore. John's words made his father frown. With a look that seemed to say, "Give me a break," John shook his head a few times, then handed me a piece of paper. It was a bill from a nearby luxury hotel. What's this? It's the bill from the hotel we stayed at. John, acting as if it was obvious, pointed at the bill on the table, then suddenly collapsed. Ow, what the heck, Mom? I didn't raise you to be like this. My mother-in-law, gasping for breath, was met with a look of disbelief from John. Next to him, Emily wore the same expression. Why are you so angry? It's just that the family is changing because I'm getting married. Plus, you'll have a grandchild. A blood-related one at that. Aren't you happy? You two didn't. My mother-in-law, looking as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing, glanced at Emily, then turned her gaze to me. Both my in-laws understood that I didn't want children and still treated me as their own daughter. Of course, they treated Emily, my childhood friend, similarly, but there was always a boundary between a daughter-in-law and a friend. I remembered Emily often complaining about that. So, I was certain my mother-in-law wouldn't be happy about this situation, and Emily should have known it too. You doted on Emma, right? It'll be your grandchild, so you'll be happy, right? It's because she's a child I've known since she was little. Oh, but half of her blood is from John, right? Even after all this, Emily, showing no sign of remorse and acting as if she couldn't understand the problem, gave me goosebumps. At that moment, someone who had been silent until now spoke up. Enough already. It's disgusting. Huh? Emma? Emma, who had been playing with her smartphone in the corner of the room, spoke to Emily without looking up. The room fell into a stunned silence. My dad is the only one I consider my father. Whether we're related by blood or not, he's the only one. But, you know, John has always been the one to attend your school events. I heard everything from Dad. How he was always informed of the event dates after they were over. How eventually, even the events themselves were kept from him. But Dad always said I was his daughter. So, I am his daughter, and I will never be yours. Emma glared at Emily as she said this. Then, sitting beside me, she switched to a more concerned tone. You know, when I found out about this, I thought you would hate me. But Dad said that wasn't the case, so I came here today. Emma, I love you so much. You were so kind to visit me every day while I was in the hospital. I was really happy. Sarah! Emma, perhaps relieved of her anxiety, teared up and hugged me tightly. It might indeed be a child resulting from an affair between John and Emily. Yet, it's a child I've taken care of for 15 years, there's no way I don't have affection for her. Speaking of which, Emily, weren't you curious why I wasn't surprised when I found out Emma is John's daughter? Ah. Emily looked startled. Before she could speak, a new person entered the room. We knew from the start. 10 years ago, actually. George! Emily started to panic when George suddenly appeared. Understandably so, as she had recently unilaterally demanded a divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. I was shocked when you mentioned divorce. Oh, and unfortunately, you're not divorced yet. The divorce papers are still here. Didn't you notice? What? I figured it wasn't in Emily and John's nature to confirm things, but I couldn't help but be stunned that Emily, despite the 100-day waiting period for women to remarry, hadn't noticed for months. So, Emily is still my wife, and Emma is still my daughter. Well, soon there won't be a wife, though. Wait, What do you mean? A 15-year-old can choose their parent. That's not true. Emma wants to be with Mom, right? Emily said that and looked at Emma. Emma frowned at Emily and held my hand. Emily was speechless at that and glared at me. Then, John suddenly burst into laughter. So that's what it is. You two are together, huh? But too bad, isn't it impossible to live on George's salary alone? Can you stop making weird assumptions? Also, it seems George earns double the amount you think Emily knows about. Huh? It's probably a bluff, lol. Besides, it's impossible for you to work while dealing with your illness. You'll just die miserably somewhere. This time I laughed at John's huge misunderstanding. John, seeing me suddenly start laughing, was getting frustrated. You didn't know about my income, did you? Huh? It's probably just a bit more than a part-time job. No, it's different. My annual income is $500,000. Huh? John's eyes and mouth were wide open in shock. Emily was also stunned. In fact, over the past 10 years, I had become a popular children's book author, and my income had skyrocketed from essays, interviews, and the like. Moreover, a film adaptation is planned soon, so my income is skyrocketing. Liar! Oh, do you want to see this? I said that and showed Emily my bank account screen. It clearly showed a large amount of money being deposited every month, and Emily was at a loss for words when she saw it. Sarah, let's, make up. Huh? What are you saying? Emily was furious at John's words, blinded by the money. I watched them blankly and then opened my mouth. Well, if you want to get married, feel free. Oh, and I'll definitely take the compensation for damages. Sarah, wait, Sarah. Ignoring John's words, I took Emma's hand. And after saying goodbye to my in-laws, I left their house. John originally worked at my father-in-law's company, but it was revealed that he was lying about going out for sales, and he was fired. My father-in-law planned to forcibly put him on a friend's fishing boat and work him to the bone. Working on a fishing boat was tough for indoor-loving John, and he contacted me several times, but each time I notified my father-in-law, and eventually, the calls stopped. Emily lost custody to George and got divorced. She seemed uninterested in John, who couldn't afford luxuries, and didn't seem to chase after him. She was disowned by her family and lived alone in a rundown apartment. She hadn't worked at all since getting married, and since she had always made others do things for her, she couldn't do anything herself, and there were hardly any places that would hire her as a full-time employee. Still, she had to pay for her living expenses and child support, so she worked multiple part-time jobs and barely made ends meet. After entering a high school, Emma worked hard every day to study abroad and go to a prestigious university overseas. Being originally diligent, her dream is to translate my picture books and deliver them to children all over the world, which makes me happy. As for me, my picture books are selling well, and I am receiving more and more offers for anime adaptations and merchandise. My illness is also progressing well, and although I am still hospitalized, my doctor recently told me that I might be able to leave the hospital next year. And one more thing, George and Emma come to visit me every day. Actually, George recently confessed to me, with remarriage in mind. I haven't given my answer yet, but I can't help but have feelings for him, who said he wants to live together when I leave the hospital. While thinking about what to answer, I work on my picture books every day. Hoping for a happy future for us, I weave stories again today. A mom friend who always finds a reason not to pay for meals. She invites me to go out and then leaves without paying, as if it's natural. I had become the one who always pays. One day, she invited me to a hotel and said, "Pay $1,500. I was confused and asked, "What are you talking about?" And she demanded that I pay for our share of the lodging. She was saying something so unreasonable. I'm still in shock, but I'm going to give her a dose of reality. I am Michelle, a 45-year-old office worker. I live with my husband of 18 years, our middle school daughter, and elementary school son. Since both my husband and I work, we share household chores. Whoever has free hands does the dishes, and we cooperate to manage our daily lives. My husband actively takes care of our kids, driving our daughter to her sports activities, playing catch with our son. He's a great father. I'm happy to spend time with such a considerate husband and cute children. Then one day, a person who shattered my peaceful daily life appeared. Michelle, wanna go out for coffee sometime? One morning, while I was taking out the trash, the one who spoke to me was my neighbor and fellow mom, Susan. Good morning, coffee, you say? I asked back, and she replied. There's a cafe that opened nearby that sells delicious bread. I thought we might go together. Apparently, a trendy cafe that sells popular Korean bread had opened nearby. Oh, I see. I said non-committally, but Susan was thinking to herself. Oh, Michelle, you have work, right? Yeah. And seemed to be considering something. Susan, a mom of my daughter's classmate, hadn't talked much before, but we'd had some interaction lately. Let's go on Saturday. Yes, that'll be good. Susan was excited, but I wasn't enthusiastic. To be honest, between work, housework, and childcare on weekdays, I want my 2 days off for family time. As I was thinking of refusing, Susan said, on Saturday, your daughter has sports, and your son said he has plans with friends, so there's no problem, right? I was surprised that Susan knew my children's schedules, and asked, how do you know that? She cheerfully responded, I heard from David, who's in the same sports activities, that there's practice, and your son said he's going out to play. It became hard to refuse Susan, who was in such a good mood. So, Saturday it is. She left after stating the date and meeting place, and I had committed to going to the cafe. Then Saturday came, and I was feeling down after working overtime. We were supposed to meet at the station, but Susan was nowhere to be seen even 10 minutes later. Michelle! I saw Susan waving from a distance, looking cheerful. Oh, it's a bit chilly today, she said, without apologizing for being late, and talked all the way from the station to the cafe. When we arrived at the cafe, there was a surprisingly long line, even though it had only been open for an hour. Oh my, lots of young people. Most of the other customers were young people. I suggested going to another store because of the long wait, but Susan stubbornly refused, saying, no, I want to eat this bread. We waited in line for an hour. Finally seated, guided by the staff. Phew, I'm tired. Michelle, you should have gotten the drinks ready, Susan said. Holding back my frustration, I smiled and apologized. Sorry for not being thoughtful. The bread at the cafe Susan had strongly recommended was indeed delicious, and I felt very satisfied. I thought about coming with my family next time. As we were about to leave, Susan said, excuse me, I need to go to the restroom, and headed to the toilet. After waiting 5 more minutes, feeling the stares of people in the waiting line, I paid the bill. Another 10 minutes outside, Susan came out of the shop, saying, sorry to keep you waiting. My stomach hurt a little. I asked about her condition, and she said, I'm fine now. Walking ahead of me. As I tried to speak, Susan cut me off and asked, hey, are you thirsty or something? What do you want? Come on, pick something. Even when I declined, she insisted. Come on. Push the button, hurry. I was almost forcibly told to choose, and so I picked some tea. It's on me, enjoy your drink, she said, so I thanked her, and Susan was smug about it. Could it be that she thinks this will cover the cost of the coffee and the bread? I don't feel comfortable explicitly saying, please pay. Normally, wouldn't you ask the person how much it was? Feeling a bit uneasy, we arrived at the station before I knew it. Susan quickly went home, saying she had something to do. Since then, every time I was invited for tea, Susan would ditch the bill. Not only that, but she seems to be inquiring about my family's activities from other people. Meanwhile, she leaves her kids with her in-laws on Saturdays and Sundays and goes out with friends, hardly ever being at home. Lately, she has even been leaving her kids with us to go out drinking on weekday nights. She had been checking when we would be home to drop off her child. Bringing the child before dinner, she said. "Oh, is it dinner time? Well then, please take care of my child too." The child was happy to eat with us, saying it felt like siblings, but it wouldn't be the same for the adults. "Is your husband not home?" I asked, to which she replied. "He is on a business trip a lot, so he's not here right now. Take care, okay?" It seems her husband is away a lot for work. "Hold on, at least pay for the food, please." Honestly, with 2 growing children, the cost of food can be quite a burden. "It doesn't make much difference with just 2 more," Susan said, leaving, but any homemaker should understand. A month has already passed since we started living this way, and the kids are on summer vacation. On the way home, Susan from the neighborhood invited us to go out with our families. What should we do? On his way home from work, my husband had been approached by Susan. Since Susan's husband would be home, she invited us to go out during the holiday. If it's with the family, it's probably fine. If her husband is there, it shouldn't be a problem, right? I thought, with some apprehension. I don't know. But the kids seemed to be on board. It seems he had already mentioned it to the children, and it was set between them and Susan. "It depends on you and my schedule," he said. I was so dumbfounded by Susan's strong-arm tactics that I couldn't say anything. If the kids are looking forward to it, we have no choice. I contacted Susan, and we decided on the time and place while discussing the details, and the day finally arrived. "Hey, where's your husband?" Her husband, who was supposed to be there, was nowhere to be found. Unfortunately, he had to go on a sudden business trip. It seems Susan's husband won't be able to join, and it'll just be her and her 2 children. "Then I'll follow behind." We drove separately to the destination. We arrived at a rental campground with fully equipped facilities, including cottages, and we were going to stay overnight and return the next day. While we were preparing the barbecue, the kids were already playing. Once everything was ready, we started grilling the meat. We had reserved food for 10, which was 2 extra servings. Since Susan's husband wasn't there, we had 3 extra servings, and I was worried that we might have too much. Breakfast is always the kids' favorite, but during the summer break, thinking of the menu for lunch and dinner is such a hassle, isn't it? We were just having a casual conversation, while Susan just sat there. "That's why, today we're just grilling meat. Easy peasy." My husband and I are busy preparing the barbecue and frantically grilling meat, while Susan just sits there, doing nothing, with a cool expression on her face. "We have to watch the kids properly, after all." She says this but only watches the children from afar. When I call the children to eat the grilled meat, she reaches out and takes it, saying, "Wow, that looks delicious." Oh. My children and I all wear surprised expressions, and Susan suddenly realizes. "Oh, is this for the children?" I was thinking of giving it to the children first, but it's fine since we're grilling more. The children look disappointed, and I thought Susan would apologize, but she just laughs and says, "You better eat quickly, or I'll eat it all up." My husband and the kids are utterly taken aback by this. And then there's Susan, eating even more meat than the growing children. We had planned 1 lamb chop per person, but she has already had 4 and is reaching for more. "Susan, you've reserved only 1 lamb chop per person. You've already eaten 2 extra ones for yourself and your husband, so please eat something else." It might seem like a trivial matter, but there's no substitute food because it's by reservation. "What? There are restrictions on what I can eat? That's stingy," she said, to which I replied, "Didn't you check when you made the reservation?" She should have known exactly what and how much was available since we decided on it together. When we were planning, and we talked about ordering more because we have growing children, she said, "I don't eat much, I have a small appetite. Just think of me as not there, and 1 extra portion should be fine." With my children who eat well and the men around, I thought it would be safe to order for 10 people. We had 2 middle school children who could eat 2 portions each, and 1 elementary school child who could eat 2 portions, so there shouldn't have been any problem with the amount. But the meat was disappearing quickly. "Mom, I want to eat that meat," my son said, reaching for the meat he wanted, only to have Susan snatch it and eat it quickly. I was angry, but my usually mild-mannered husband was starting to show his irritation as well. The reason we couldn't strongly object was that Susan's children were also there. "Mom, don't act like a child," said Susan's daughter. "What are you talking about? Camping is all about survival, and survival means fighting over meat." The children seemed dumbfounded by Susan's childish behavior. Afterward, we finished the barbecue, played outside for a while, and then decided to take a break. The cottages were separate, so we could get away from Susan and catch our breath. It was supposed to be fun, but it's just so tense. My husband looked tired. "Yeah, let's eat breakfast and head home early tomorrow." We spent the rest of the time relaxing with the family and greeted the morning. "Good morning." Susan came out of her cottage cheerfully. "Good morning. You're lively this morning," I replied, and she said, "Of course. I ate a lot and relaxed, and had a great time." For breakfast, we ate the provided sandwiches, played a little more, and then started preparing to leave. During the final payment, Susan was nowhere to be found. "Susan's not here," I told my husband, and we looked around, but Susan's children were also missing. "Hey, where's Susan and her kids?" I asked the children if they had seen her. "They said they were going to the restroom." Apparently, Susan told her daughter she was going to the restroom, and told the children to go to the restroom before leaving. "How would you like to handle the payment?" asked the cashier. "Please wait a little longer," I replied, and after waiting 10 more minutes, Susan still hadn't returned. "Isn't this taking too long?" I went to check the restroom. But Susan and her children were nowhere to be found, and her car, which was supposed to be parked next door, was gone too. "What?" My husband also looked surprised. It seemed that Susan and her family had already left. I couldn't believe it. I was on the verge of exploding with anger. To invite us and then run away without paying, it was enough to drive me insane. The total cost of the camping equipment, cottage accommodation, drinks, meat, and everything else came close to $900. Susan had confirmed the approximate amount at the time of reservation, and she had been the one who chose the place. She had rejected all the places I suggested and insisted that this particular place was perfect. Choosing a location that only allowed on-site payment seems like a premeditated act now. We decided to head straight to Susan's house. "Susan, please open up." After ringing the doorbell several times, Susan reluctantly opened the door. "Susan, why did you leave without saying anything?" I questioned. "Huh? Didn't I say I was leaving?" She pretended not to know. "Susan, you have to pay on the spot. Hand over the money," I told her a bit forcefully. "Oh, I forgot. But I don't have any money right now," Susan replied. "We confirmed the amount in advance, didn't we? You were the one who set the budget, Susan." I hadn't mentioned it before, but I couldn't keep quiet any longer. But she kept saying she had no money, so I asked what was going on. "I bought something I wanted before the camping trip. Look," she said, laughing and showing off what she had bought. "So you didn't have any money during the camping trip?" I asked, getting a bit irritated but continuing to question. "Yeah, I didn't have it when I reserved, so what?" I was fed up with Susan, who kept laughing without feeling sorry at all. "You planned this from the beginning," I said, and she replied. "Well, thanks to me inviting you, we had a great time. It's a win-win situation, isn't it?" So I confirmed one last time. "So you have no intention of paying? You're so persistent, it's embarrassing. I told you I don't have the money. When I get it, I'll pay you back. Or are you trying to squeeze money out of someone who doesn't have any?" With no shame and an unapologetic attitude, Susan laughed, and I reached my breaking point. I see, understood. I went home without saying anything more and discussed the situation with my husband. Time passed, and Susan suggested, Michelle, a tasty restaurant opened nearby. Let's go. She acted as if the past incident never happened. I'm sorry, I'm busy, so I'll have to pass. I had been turning down Susan's invitations for the past few months. Losing patience, Susan approached me with an angry look. Hey, are you avoiding me? You're still holding a grudge over the camping thing? A few hundred or a few $1,000s, so what? I can't believe you'd avoid someone over that, even if it were several tens of thousands. Susan ranted, infuriated and talking fast. Is that so? Susan, let's go to an inn next time. I suggested a trip to Susan. Huh? Oh, sure, you planned it? In that case, I'll have to coordinate with my family. Susan became cheerful. I told her my husband had given me some alone time and was thinking of going on a 2-night trip. When asked if my husband would mind taking care of the kids, I declined, saying he was busy. To the hesitant Susan, I said, I plan to stay for 2 nights from Friday. If it's difficult, I'll go alone. To which she replied, Wait, in that case, I'll leave them with my in-laws. Susan said she would leave them with her husband's parents and go on the trip. When I showed her the exterior of the inn, Susan became even more delighted. I'll book 2 rooms. There seems to be a spa and all. I told her about the inn, and Susan started to look up various things on her own. How about I invite my friends too? She said, so I told her I'd make the reservations all at once. A month later, the day of the inn reservation arrived. Susan and her friends were at my house, looking puzzled at me. Aren't you going to drive us? Sorry. I have to stop by my in-laws, so let's go separately. I said, and Susan reluctantly agreed, and we headed to the inn in different cars. Wow, I can't believe we're staying at such a lovely inn. Michelle, thank you. Everyone was amazed at the magnificence of the inn. Let's enjoy our free time then. Susan and her friends were having a great time, seemingly forgetting about me. The first day was just eating, bathing, and sleeping. After the bath, I ran into Susan and her friends having a huddled conversation. Hey, Susan. Are you sure about staying at such an expensive inn? Can you afford it? One of Susan's friends asked. Yes, it's all on me. Susan boasted. Amazing. It's over $1,000 per person per night. So generous. In that case, I'll turn off notifications for texts and calls, and spend time in this dream world until we leave the hotel. Susan said she would pay for 5 friends lodging in full, and everyone was getting excited. The morning of the second day, they went to the spa for massages, and were able to spend a meaningful time healing their everyday fatigue. I tried texting Susan, but she didn't read it or reply even by night. It seemed she was having a good time. Hello, Michelle, it's morning already. Cheerful Susan called. Yes, that's right. I replied, wondering why I was stating the obvious. You overslept, so it's your fault, right? We're going home first, so pay $15,000. Susan said something utterly unexpected. Huh? Oversleep? $15,000? What are you talking about? I didn't understand what she meant. The last one always pays, right? Susan said, so I replied. Yeah. I'm already home, though. Didn't you see my text? I had told Susan I was going home through text. Oh, I wouldn't be looking at my phone in such a fabulous, unreal place. I explained the situation to Susan. I went home on the second night. My mother-in-law seems to be feeling unwell, so I came to my parents' house early. Originally, I was only going to pick up the children and husband who were out playing, but as my mother-in-law wasn't feeling well, I decided to leave early. Why didn't you say something? Susan was angry. I told her that my husband contacted me late, so I texted her, and she asked, What? What about the bill? Thinking she was mad about me going home without paying my share, I said. Don't worry, I've already paid. Oh, right, that's fine then. We just have to return the keys at the front desk and go home. Susan said, her tone returning to calm. Well, yes. Since it's on-site payment, please stop by the front desk. My part has been properly deducted. If the front desk handled everything properly, there shouldn't be a problem, I explained. You did pay, right? Susan asked again. Yes, I paid my part before I left, so it's okay. I replied. However, Susan's next words made me uneasy. What about our part? With this question, I was sure that Susan intended to make me pay. Please pay for yourselves. I heard after the bath that Susan, you were going to pay for your friends, right? Well, that's... Susan stammered. You're amazing. Honestly, I thought you were the worst kind of person for always disappearing when it's time to pay. So you really were going to pay back the money for the camp later. I misunderstood you, Susan, I'm sorry. I joked, building her up. Wait a minute. I cut off Susan's protest and said, tell me all about your wonderful time when you get back. See you later. And I hung up the phone. When I got home, my worried husband asked, Are you okay? But I smiled and said, Yeah, I'm fine. Susan and the others seemed to have a great time. Later, Susan, who had invited her friends by saying, I'll pay, somehow managed to pay using multiple credit cards. When Susan returned, her complexion was very bad, unlike the last person she had met at the inn. I never intended to pay, she screamed as she went home. According to what the children heard from Susan's children, her husband, who had returned from a business trip, scolded her terribly. You have to earn and pay that large amount of $15,000 yourself, he said, and she seemed to have started working part-time. For Susan, who had been leading a sloppy life, leaving housework and childcare to others, it must be a very tough time. She seems to be working so hard that she has no time to rest, both physically and mentally. I no longer get invitations to play from Susan, nor do I have to look after her children, and I've been able to regain a peaceful daily life. On holidays, I can spend time leisurely with my family, and I'm very happy. It's thanks to me that you're alive, you parasite. If you have a problem, then divorce me and get out. In John's eyes, the kindness that was evident when we first met was now gone, replaced by a chilling coldness. The glasses he wore and the tie around his neck looked rather expensive, making it clear just how self-centered John had become just from his appearance and behavior. Fine, I'll leave. I said that, packed my things, and left immediately. And I vowed to retaliate against John. My name is Linda. I work as an administrative assistant in a company and live with my mother. Although I seem pretty ordinary, there's one thing about me that sets me apart from everyone else. That is, I use a wheelchair. In fact, due to a traffic accident I had in my student days, I had to live my life in a wheelchair, even though I wasn't fatally injured. When I first started using a wheelchair, there was a lot I had to get used to, and it was quite challenging. But, you know, people are resilient, and once you've spent enough time in a wheelchair, you get the hang of it. Sometimes I wonder if this is what folks would call a silver lining in a cloud. To be able to think that way probably means I've come to a good place mentally. But just going to work and coming back home isn't enough to make life fulfilling. So, my favorite pastime was going to the local library in town to read. I've loved books since I was a kid, and even now as an adult, I'm still a bookworm. And that day too, I was at the library. But on that day, there was a medium-sized rock at the entrance for some reason, and I had trouble getting past it. The one who helped me was John. With his help, I could enter the library without a hitch. From then on, I often saw John at the library, and eventually, we started dating and finally got married. And so, I began living with John. But after a while, John made a surprising proposal. Linda, I want you to take good care of our home, and I want you to be my rock. So, I'd like you to be a stay-at-home wife. Please. Wait, a stay-at-home wife? John suddenly pleaded with me to become a stay-at-home wife, but to be honest, I really didn't want to quit my job. But John kept asking me over and over to be a stay-at-home wife, so in the end, I gave in. My colleagues never expected me to resign and tried hard to convince me to stay, but at the time, I prioritized my husband's wish over everything. In fact, just the act of telling the company I wanted to resign was exhausting, and by the time I did resign, I was mentally drained. Since I quit my job, life has felt dull and uninteresting. Out of boredom, I called my old college friend, Alicia, to vent, but she was quite critical of my feelings. In this day and age, where both men and women usually work, husbands who ask their working wives to become stay-at-home wives are rare. Linda, you're blessed, and you should be more grateful for your current situation. Alicia, unlike me, always talks about wanting to quit her job. It was clear that we had contrasting views. I had hoped Alicia might at least pretend to empathize with my frustrations, but she completely shut me down, leaving me feeling lonely. Plus, the allowance John gives me for household expenses is minimal, and I've had to be very frugal. When it wasn't enough, I had to dip into the savings I had accumulated when I was working full-time. Because of that, I was determined to not overspend and started cutting back significantly on my beauty expenses. Still, my savings were dwindling. Watching the balance decrease became a sad daily ritual, leaving me in a sour mood. But I found it hard to voice these concerns to my hardworking family, so I kept silent. So, without my fulfilling job and having to skimp on beauty expenses, the only joy left in my life was borrowing books from the library. Libraries are great, right? Being able to borrow books for free is awesome. At that time, I was more focused on saving money, and the joy of reading was overshadowed by the fact that I was borrowing books for free. It was a bit of a shock to realize how having less money could change one's perspective so much. Nowadays, with streaming services, you can listen to music for free, and there are definitely more free entertainment options than a few years ago. But, no matter how many free entertainment options there are, the reality of having less money still brings down your spirits. Even in such a situation, I still loved John. I didn't want to bring up anything with John that could lead to an argument, even if it meant distancing myself from him. For that reason, I never told John about the lack of household allowance. Instead, I silently endured, escaping reality by immersively reading books while listening to free music. However, after a while, John started coming home late more frequently. Concerned, I asked John, "You've been coming home late recently. Is something wrong?" To which John replied, "Work's been busy, and I've been doing overtime. Sorry for making you worry." Honestly, in this modern age where overtime is becoming rare, I wondered if he could really be working late so often. But, given that I was relying on him for our living expenses, I found it hard to question him further and let the matter slide. But one day, John unexpectedly stayed out overnight. Feeling suspicious, I checked John's phone while he was in the shower. To my dismay, it was full of evidence that John had been cheating on me. Moreover, it seemed that the woman he was seeing had been in a relationship with him even before we got married. Even after finding undeniable proof, I didn't have the courage to confront John about his infidelity. I guess, back then, I was still in love with him and couldn't muster the strength. However, I was hurt by his betrayal and saved the evidence of his affair on my phone. The revelation of John's cheating devastated me. On top of that, there was no sign of him increasing the allowance he gave me. Even though we were married, I wondered why I was the only one enduring such misery. Overthinking the situation gave me migraines, adding to my worries. Life felt so terrible. Yet, every morning, I had to prepare breakfast and lunch for John. By that time, I had grown weary of making meals for him, wondering why I even had to cater to such a man, often sighing in frustration. John seemed oblivious to how I felt, quietly eating his breakfast and heading off to work with his packed lunch. "He's probably gonna come home late again," I thought, sighing once more. But, surprisingly, John came home early that day and dined with me. However, he began criticizing me, saying, "The dinner today tastes off. And you're my wife, you should try to look prettier." Looking back, John might have been having dinner at his mistress's house, which could have been why he was coming home late. So, without realizing it, he might have been comparing me to his mistress, which is probably why he made such comments to me. I finally lost my temper and shouted at him. "After all the effort I put into making dinner, all you do is complain. Plus, I know about your affair. The reason I can't always look my best is that you barely give me enough money to get by. I've been using up my savings from when I was single because what you give isn't enough. I was better off when I was working and single." John, realizing that I knew of his affair, impulsively picked up a vase nearby and splashed its water at me. I was trembling, both with rage and fear from his unexpected behavior. John, seeming completely unapologetic, said, "You're just a leech living off me. If you've got a problem, divorce me and leave." His eyes, once filled with kindness when we first met, now appeared cold and distant. Looking closer, I could tell that even the glasses and tie John was wearing seemed expensive. Just by his appearance and behavior alone, it was clear how self-centered he was. "Well, I'm leaving." I said that, quickly packed my things, and left right away. And I swore to myself that I would get back at John. Although John clearly saw me leave the house, he made no move to stop me. In fact, he had an expression that almost seemed grateful I was going. I was shocked by how much John had changed. It chilled my heart to realize how quickly love can fade, even after we'd been so in love when we got married. I think I was probably crying at that moment. By the time the taxi I caught reached my parents' home, my tears had stopped, but the emptiness remained. My mother greeted me with surprise but warmth. "I don't know what happened, but come on inside." "Thank you, Mom." "It's okay, honey. We're family, it's what we do." "Yeah, thank you so much." The moment my mother hugged me, I started crying again. I thought my love for John had long since faded, yet I still found myself crying over him. Maybe deep down, I didn't want to leave John and was shocked by our separation. With so many emotions swirling inside me, my mother held me close, never letting go. Wrapped in my mother's love, I felt alive again, and an overwhelming sense of happiness. "Something must have really hurt you." Seeing me cry, my mother stroked my head just like she used to when I was little. We went inside, and my mother tried to distract me with some funny TV shows and offered me some oranges she'd gotten from a neighbor. By the time I'd finished the oranges, the TV show that came on was a comedy show that John and I used to watch together. It was a simple show where a humorous host chatted with comedians and celebrities. We really loved it. I was just silently watching that show, but I must have had a somber look on my face. Seeing me like that, my mother must have become worried and asked, "Linda, did something happen with John?" "There's been a lot, Mom. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin." "Oh, I see. It's okay, Linda. Take your time and tell me at your own pace, okay?" "Yeah, I'll do that." With that, I told my mother everything that had happened. After listening to my entire story, my mother was livid. "I can't believe someone would make my Linda feel this way. You can stay here as long as you want and relax. It must have been hard on you." "Thanks, Mom. So, you're close with John's mom since you both went to the same school. Could you, maybe, mention what John did to me?" "Got it. I'll talk to her the next time we see each other." "Leave it to me." Thanks to my mother talking to my mother-in-law, John got into big trouble. I had a missed call from John on my phone. When I called back, John shouted angrily, "Hey, what's going on? The allowance I was getting from my parents suddenly stopped, and it's causing me problems. You had something to do with it, didn't you?" Apparently, John had some debts from gambling, and he'd been using about 70% of his salary and the entire allowance from his parents to pay it off. Due to the sudden stop in his allowance, he was clearly panicking. Though it was due to my mother's interference that John's allowance was cut off, I didn't want anything to do with him, so I played dumb. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm busy. Bye. With that, I hung up. I felt a bit relieved knowing John was facing this predicament, but I wasn't completely at peace. The resentment I had towards John kept building up, and my stress had solidified over time. Just a little revenge wasn't going to be enough to ease it. And the thing is, when people have too much time on their hands, they tend to obsess over petty things. Of course, I was no exception. As days went by, my grudge against John only deepened, and there wasn't much I could do about it. I could have vented to my mother, but I felt bad complaining about the same thing repeatedly, and I already knew her response would be predictable. So, I decided to reach out to my old friend, Alicia. Alicia responded immediately, and I could tell she was doing well. I've got something to tell you. Wanna grab a coffee sometime? I suggested, and Alicia agreed enthusiastically. As the day approached to meet Alicia, I felt excited. It made me realize how much I enjoy social interactions. Just thinking about what to wear was exhilarating. On the day of our meetup, Alicia and I met up and went to a nearby cafe. There, I told Alicia everything about what John had done and the current situation. I see, that sounds tough. Yeah, and John would give me so little for household expenses, but he always bought expensive stuff for himself. His glasses had all these fine details and embellishments, and his tie was made of what seemed to be expensive fabric with beautiful red and blue stripes. As I described the unique features of John's belongings, Alicia seemed to recall something and went silent for a moment. After taking a deep breath, she asked me, "Hey, Linda, can you tell me your husband's name? I feel like I might know him." "Oh, really? You know him? His name is John Martinez." "I do know him." "Wow, John Martinez is my boss. I really don't like him, he's so annoying and nitpicky, and his instructions at work are hard to understand." I had no idea. "But how did you figure it out?" "Well, I happened to remember my boss wearing a distinctive tie that looked expensive. So when you mentioned a similar tie, I just thought maybe, and bingo. I was shocked." "I see. So, can you spread the word at the company about how messed up John is?" "That sounds good. If all goes well, he might quit, and you can get back at him. I'd be happy to help." And so, Alicia began to spread rumors about John being an unreliable husband at the office. Gradually, the news spread throughout the company. By that time, John felt like he was walking on eggshells, finding it difficult to be at work. After a while, I started receiving emails from him. The emails were about how he felt uncomfortable at the office and didn't know what to do. For my part, I felt like shouting at John. "Why should I care? If you hadn't done what you did to me, none of this would have happened. It's all your own doing." But I didn't want anything to do with John, so I ignored the emails. However, it's strange how men act. The moment a woman stops chasing after them, they start chasing the woman. I've read about this phenomenon in many relationship advice books, but I never thought it would actually happen to me. Probably because I had been ignoring John's emails, I received another email from him. "After some thought, I realized that I need you, Linda. I want to discuss our future and try to start over. Please, can we meet?" I could feel the desperation in John's message, and by the time I finished reading, I was completely drained. Even a single email from John could ruin the good mood my mother and Alicia had set for me. Such power he had. Now, how to deal with this email? I did think about ignoring it again, but on second thought, John and I are technically still married. Honestly, I wished I could erase the fact that I registered our marriage with someone who brings me down. I even wanted to divorce him right away. So, thanks to John's email, I finally made up my mind to get a divorce. I acted swiftly. "All right, if we involve our parents in the discussion, I'm okay with meeting you." And that's how I responded to John immediately. Soon after, I received a reply from John, and I was able to get his approval. I bet John probably thinks that because I'm seriously considering our future together, that's why I've said I want to discuss things involving both our families. He's likely in La La Land, completely misunderstanding the situation. As for me, I was in the middle of a triumphant pose, having successfully led John to that mistaken belief. I had been strategizing with my mother about how we'd teach John a lesson, and my mother had shared the plan with my mother-in-law. Then, surprisingly, my father-in-law also decided to join our strategy. It seemed that my mother-in-law and father-in-law were appalled at John's irresponsibility and bad character. They no longer saw him as their son. That's probably why they sided with me in this situation. So, with everyone except John, we kept discussing and refining our plan. On the day of the confrontation, my mother and I headed to the house where John lived. Upon arrival, John greeted us with a smile, but I felt a chill. Already in the living room were my mother-in-law and father-in-law. When everyone had gathered, John began to speak. "Linda, would you live with me in this house again?" "No, I want a divorce." I calmly responded and began laying out the lawyer's business card and various pieces of evidence of his affairs on the table. Seeing this, John paled as my mother-in-law and father-in-law started berating him. "How could you, as a man, let Linda go through all that? I never thought you'd turn out to be such a loser. We're done with you." "Really, I don't want to see your face anymore, John." "Ah, Linda, you can always rely on me, okay?" With that, John was berated by his parents, got a firm disownment, and in the end, it was settled that he'd divorce me. "Tell me it's a lie. I know I messed up. I'm sorry. Please, everyone, forgive me." John's pitiful voice echoed throughout the living room. Afterwards, my divorce from John went through smoothly, and a little later, when I informed Alicia about it, she said she had some news too. Given the cheeriness in Alicia's voice, I thought maybe she was gonna get married, but that wasn't the case. Turns out, Alicia joyfully informed me that John had quit his job. According to Alicia's story, after John and I divorced, he felt increasingly uncomfortable at work and eventually chose to resign voluntarily. "Well, I'm just glad I don't have to deal with that annoying boss nitpicking or taking those lousy job instructions anymore. Really, it feels like a thanks for letting me go moment." Alicia's carefree voice came over the phone. As for me, hearing about John's voluntary resignation, I felt a mix of happiness and emptiness. I mean, I didn't like John anymore, but he was once someone I loved. The fact that he left his job because of our issues weighed on me a bit. But John not only subjected me to financial abuse but also cheated on me. Maybe it was some kind of divine retribution. At least, that's how I tried to see it. Plus, John divided the property appropriately. Rumor has it that John is working day and night to pay off his debts and cover his living expenses. Seems like fitting punishment for him, if you ask me. As for myself, I've been living with my mother as usual. But I realized I couldn't keep doing that forever, so I started working as a full-time office worker again. Having had experience in administrative roles, I got hired quickly. My company regards me as an immediate asset, and they rely on me. Contrary to popular belief, office work can be pretty intricate when you get into the details. We administrative staff need to communicate well, teach each other, and sometimes cover for someone on maternity leave. Teamwork is essential. Working like this, naturally, I became close with my coworkers. That's why I really enjoy my job. Even when I come home tired, my mother, unchanged from those days, warmly welcomes me and has dinner ready. Having dinner with my mother, we chat about what happened at work today or engage in some light-hearted banter. I truly enjoy these moments. Frankly, my married life with John lacked these warm moments. It was pretty bland. So, I cherish this happiness every day, living joyfully with my mother. I can't thank you enough to my mother. We can divorce if you want, but let me live with our son. After berating me extensively, John looked satisfied as he took a deep breath. As I pondered on how to retort, our son, who had been waiting in the background, stepped forward. If you don't know, Dad, let me tell you. That person is. Pointing at his father's mistress, our son spat out words that made me break into a cheeky smile. My name is Jennifer. I turned 42 this year. Currently, I'm a freelance illustrator while doing housework. I've been married for 15 years and have a son who's in 8th grade this year. Ever since we got married, John has been jumping from job to job, not lasting very long. We mostly live off my income. To raise our son, a steady income is needed, so I've worked hard to make ends meet while also taking care of him. Balancing housework, child raising, and my job, I had to work from home. John often left home for sporadic short-term jobs, making it impossible for me to leave our child behind and work outside. At first, being a newbie to the freelance world was tough, but now, the results are evident, and I'm confident about my stable income and consistent work. Thanks to referrals from former clients, I've landed new projects. In these new assignments, I'm responsible for illustrating educational magazines and brochures. Now that David has grown up and I don't have to look after him as much as I used to, I not only work from home but also manage to go out for work a few times a week. Thus, the three of us live together harmoniously, but there's something that's been bothering me. It's about John. Seeing that I've been earning steadily, John doesn't seem eager to find a new job and has been quite aimless. I'm always worried if it's okay for him at 44 to be living like this. He rarely works full-time, so he should have some free time, but John doesn't help much with housework or child raising. It's been like this since we got married, so I've kinda given up on it. He doesn't seem to be interested in our son, David, who's now in those challenging teenage years, which annoys me. David may not be very talkative and seems distant, but there are times when he helps with the chores when I'm not looking. Maybe he's seen me juggling work and household chores since he was little, so he's the kind of boy who voluntarily offers to help. David has grown up so much, but John, on the other hand, doesn't seem to have matured at all. Lately, John's been coming home late more often, and I guess I've been holding on to some unease and frustration. It's only natural to be suspicious. Even on days when I don't think he's scheduled to work, he says he has to go for work reasons. But I can't imagine he's secretly job hunting without telling us. There are other things he does that make me suspicious. For the past few months, though John hasn't been looking after David much, he's become keen on picking him up and dropping him off at his basketball club. Even though David is just in 8th grade, given the dangers of today's world, our household rule is to always drop off and pick up. I've always been the one squeezing this into my work schedule, but lately, for some reason, John started offering to do it. I appreciate the help with the pickups and drop-offs, but something felt off. I happened to realize the nature of my suspicion by chance when I passed by the place David goes to. I decided to take a different route home for a change of pace after shopping. In front of the place David goes to, I saw John, who wasn't supposed to be there. He had said he'd be late tonight because of work out of town. John was chatting happily with a woman who looked like one of the staffs from the basketball facility in front of the building. I had a bad feeling, and as I stared at the two of them, the woman noticed me and tilted her head, calling out, "Excuse me, are you David's mom?" "Yes, my son always been in your care." "Thank you," I responded, nodding slightly awkwardly to the woman who was talking cutesy. Though I had seen her a few times during drop-offs and pickups, I didn't remember all the faces of the staff. I was wondering which duties she does here. Ignoring my husband who looked rigid and tense, I made small talk with her. The woman introduced herself as Jessica. Isn't it usual to introduce herself with not only name, but also what she's in charge of my child in such situations? Noticing my puzzled expression, my husband seemed to hurry to end their conversation. On the way home, we didn't speak, and it felt like he was purposely avoiding me. Even though he seemed to enjoy talking to Jessica so much, while walking beside me, he was deliberately looking down, avoiding eye contact. I could tell something was up. His late returns recently and his eagerness to do the drop-offs and pickups, combined with his strange behavior after being spotted, made me believe that woman, Jessica, had something to do with it. Is he having an affair with that slightly younger woman? Somewhere in my heart, I knew. I had sensed the change. Ever since he started doing the drop-offs and pickups, he had become noticeably distant from me. That day, when our son returned from the basketball club, I casually inquired about his father's behavior. However, the only response I got from him was a curt and he was like, "I dunno." It seemed my son was pretty darn annoyed about his dad wanting to drive him to and from the facility every day. Chasing after our reluctant son and forcing him to there just didn't seem right. I've started to cast suspicious glances at him for some time now. And those suspicions were gonna be proven right soon enough. I was just passing by, so I thought I'd drop in. David, how are you feeling? Thank you for coming all this way, Jessica. Now, please have some coffee. Jessica, whom I had not suspected of being my husband's mistress, began to find excuses to visit our home more and more. She would mention our son now and then, but that was clearly just a pretext. She always appeared during the hours my husband was home, not me or my son. Watching the two of them conversing cheerfully in the living room, I was sure of John's infidelity. A month after I began to notice something odd about my husband's behavior, he started coming home later and later, sometimes leaving the house for a few days at a time. I'd subtly asked him what he was up to as he had stealthily come home late the night before, when I pointed out that his body that had sunk into the sofa quivered. Jokingly, I was like, "At least spare me the cheating," and laughed it off, but John suddenly stood up and glared at me. "You just stick to your work. I'm taking care of David, so don't pry into it unnecessarily." Whether it was the way I asked or something else, he seemed irritated, and he left the living room with a sigh. I was furious to be told as if he was doing everything when he had left all the housework and David to me. "What's the matter, Mom?" David, who had been watching our petty quarrels and squabbles, unusually spoke up. "Oh, it's nothing. What about you, David? Why are you up at this hour?" Coming out of his room, David stared at me intently before slowly opening his mouth. Hesitantly, he told me about the female staff who he thought might be his father's mistress. According to David, Jessica would cling to him a lot at the facility. David, who found it utterly annoying, would ignore her, but he was frustrated that she would come to our house. I disliked it as well, so it was obvious that my son would be annoyed by someone from his basketball club imposing on our home. I was relieved to know that I was not the only one who disliked it, but the problem was far from solved. When I returned home from a client meeting, I could hear joyful conversation from the living room. It was the voices of John and Jessica. David was probably holed up in his room, as there was no sign of him joining the conversation. When I opened the door to the living room, both of them turned their eyes to me. John, as usual, looked uncomfortable, but Jessica smiled at me with complete confidence. "Welcome back, David's mom. I ran into John, so he invited me in." Somewhere along the line, Jessica had started addressing my husband by his name, and I had a deep-seated unease about it. "Oh, we meet often, don't we? Isn't it a busy time for you at work?" I asked with a hint of sarcasm. She was like, "Well, this is part of my job," with a smug face. "What's part of the job?" I felt like yelling at her for so boldly making herself at home. "It's just that this house feels so cozy. It looks like you don't clean it thoroughly, like it has a homely feel, you know? I mean it in a good way." Jessica, subtly pointing out the deficiencies in my housekeeping, had a sly grin on her face. "I'm sorry for the messy house. She's always been bad at housework. I wish she'd step up a bit more since she's always at home." My husband didn't rebut, but instead seemed to side with Jessica, chuckling along. Even though I work from home, I am somewhat self-conscious about not keeping up with housework. But if he'd be more proactive in helping with chores and childcare, it wouldn't be an issue. I couldn't understand why I was the only one being mocked and ridiculed. Unable to bear the tension in the room, I hastily left the living room for the bedroom, still holding my stuff. I was so frustrated, sad, and embarrassed. I feared that Jessica might eventually take over my place in the family. If she weren't associated with the basketball team my son goes to, I might have snapped back. But I worried about the repercussions for my son. Even after that, my husband and Jessica continued their dates, flaunting their relationship in front of me, who couldn't say a word. I'd hear from others that they often met outside, under the pretense of discussing my son's education. I decided to gather evidence during my husband's absences, and lo and behold, I found loads of evidence of his infidelity. Even though he always claimed we couldn't afford gifts for birthdays or our anniversary, I found receipts from motels, fancy restaurants, and high-end brand watches and jewelry in his coat pocket. I even found receipts from places he told me we couldn't afford to go. It hurt to think he'd go with his mistress but not his wife. Still, I kept my composure and continued collecting evidence of his affairs. The thought of divorce crossed my mind, but I wanted to hang in there at least until David graduated from high school. However, I vowed to gather as much evidence as possible so that, if the time comes, I'd be in a favorable position. I wondered where all the money he was spending on his mistress came from. Even if he put in all of his salary, it would be hard to keep up this charade. As I wandered around the house deep in thought, I suddenly remembered something and went pale. In our house, there's an account where we've been saving up for my son's college fund. I had this overwhelming bad feeling, and cold sweat ran down my back. I quickly checked transactions of that account. What was recorded in the account was evidence of substantial amounts being withdrawn several times over the past few months. I had created this savings account specifically to secure my son's education funds just in case. I hadn't checked it in a while and was shocked to find that the balance had decreased significantly. I had meticulously managed our credit card usage and monthly bills, but I hadn't been able to check this savings account monthly. The realization hit me hard, and I began to tremble. I tried hard to steady my shaking hands. The money he spent on his affair came from the savings I had put aside for our son. I didn't even care who he was having an affair with anymore. What I couldn't forgive was the fact that he was using the money saved for our child's future for his own selfish needs. His betrayal against me as his wife pales in comparison to the betrayal against our own son. I swallowed my boiling anger and decided to continue acting like everything was normal. I didn't want our son, who's at such an impressionable age, to catch on. I chose to keep all the problems and worries to myself, trying not to burden our son, who has been studying so hard. But the stress took a toll on me, and I started making small mistakes in my household chores and at work. At work, even Mrs. Smith, a client I had known for years, noticed my worn-out state. "Jennifer, you seem off lately. Don't overdo it at work. If there's anything bothering you, please let me know anytime." "Thank you, Mrs. Smith." I felt pathetic for making her worry, but her words did offer some comfort. While I was struggling, my husband seemed to be having a blast with his mistress, more than ever. Without my interference, he seemed more relaxed. Sooner or later, our son, David, would inevitably face the problems surrounding our family. David noticed my downtrodden demeanor and silently approached to help fold the laundry. "I kinda know what's going on." "Huh?" He was like, "Do whatever you wanna do, Mom. You don't have to worry about me." He took the folded laundry to the dresser. He's not much of a talker, but his thoughtful actions warmed my heart. And it made me even angrier at the traitor who touched the money I had saved for our precious son. There needed to be some sort of retribution for the traitor. First, I wondered if I should reach out to that person who told me they'd always be there to support me. I clenched my fists tightly and swore vengeance on my husband and his mistress. One evening, my husband suddenly informed me he'd be away for almost a week due to work. He claimed it was for a training program in another state, but I doubted that's the truth. The restaurant chain he's worked for only operated within our state and didn't have any locations or offices outside. When he took the job, the very same husband boasted that one of its perks was not having to relocate out of state. When my son and I heard this story, we responded, but deep down, we were both highly critical of John. My son casually said to my husband, "You know, I heard one of the staffs from my club gonna be off work for a week too. At this time of year? I don't know if she's going on a vacation, but that seems pretty unusual." I mean, it'd be tough to go on a week-long vacation unless you've got some cash. As we conversed in a nonchalant tone, my husband looked at us with a startled expression. Until then, he had been proudly talking about the intensity of the training he was going to attend, but he suddenly became silent and stared down. Glancing at him, I noticed he was anxiously looking at his smartphone. Ever since I became sure of my husband's infidelity, I've been keeping tabs on both him and Jessica. I even hired a private investigator, who informed me that Jessica, who's working at the basketball facility, is also taking a week off. I've known all along that my husband's business trip was just a cover for a romantic getaway. I could have caught him red-handed, but I had other plans. I've been planning something ever since I knew about my husband's intentions to travel with Jessica. Of course, I had no intention of proceeding without my son's consent, but now he was on board. On the day of their trip, I waved goodbye to my eager husband, and then my son and I began cleaning the house. Along with cleaning, with the help of some relatives who came over, we also started packing. Our plan was to move out while my husband was away and stay in somewhere else. Until we found a new home, we were gonna stay with some relatives for a bit. Upon hearing our situation, the relatives, angered by my husband's actions yet concerned for David, gladly offered us a room. Moreover, I ensured that my husband couldn't access our savings account by transferring all the remaining money to my personal account. While making preparations, I noticed my husband's belongings were left behind. I couldn't leave his stuff behind when vacating the house. After some thought, I decided to send his belongings to a particular place. After getting Mrs. Smith's consent, I handed over the boxes to the pickup service. Looking around the tidy house, my son and I shared a smile. A few days after we moved, I was startled by the sudden ringing of my phone while staying at my relative's place. Seeing the caller's name made me sigh involuntarily. Hello, Jennifer? Hey. What's up in the middle of the day? Actually, during my training, I ran out of money. Can you transfer a bit to my account? My husband, who called in a panic, was obviously lying and begging me for money. No wonder our savings account was empty. He couldn't withdraw any funds. He must have really been in a bind since he sounded much more desperate than usual. Was it because he didn't want to look bad in front of Jessica? I was utterly exasperated. When I declined, he almost sounded like he was about to cry. With a smirk, I was like, why don't you just use the account you always withdraw from? Isn't there still a lot left? After a moment of silence, he started yelling and was like, are you okay with me being broke? But I didn't indulge him. Instead, I goaded him further. Your training's gonna end soon anyway. You'll be fine even without money. Suddenly, in the background, the frantic voice of a woman could be heard. That's right, I had been waiting for this moment. Taken aback by Jessica's voice in the background, my husband hastily hung up. Now everything was in place. The next day, my son and I were headed to a specific location. A magnificent mansion with a well-maintained garden. Anyone could tell that the residents were wealthy. On cue, my son and I found my cheating husband and his mistress in a room. My terrified husband sat on the floor, apologizing to someone. That someone, with a stern look on her face, was Mrs. Smith, a longtime client of mine and currently the principal of a middle school. David, my son, goes to her school, and Mrs. Smith and I have built a close relationship over the years. We trust each other with our personal troubles. I'm really sorry for my husband's trouble. I should be the one apologizing. Because of my good-for-nothing daughter, all this happened. It's turned out Jessica, who was on a trip with my husband, was grilled by her parents for a package she received at home and had no choice but to return home immediately. Naturally, she told my husband, John, to come with her. Upon hearing Mrs. Smith's words, my husband started to shake in fear. Mrs. Smith had always been concerned about my deteriorating health after knowing about John's affair. When I finally confided in her about the affair and she found out that the mistress was her daughter, she was utterly devastated. But Mrs. Smith wanted to make amends for her daughter's actions and had been cooperating with me ever since. She deeply apologized me, pointing at the piles of boxes. She sternly reprimanded her daughter. "You should be ashamed of yourself for always wanting what isn't yours. Your father and sisters were dumbfounded when they saw these packages yesterday." "But Mom, it's a misunderstanding. And who would send so many packages to our house? Isn't this woman out of her mind? John, say something." Jessica said that, her voice shaking with tears, and tried to force John, who didn't say anything, to join her. However, I doubted John would come up with any decent excuse after I glared at him. Jessica, with a panicked look on her face, blurted out that she didn't know her mother worked with me. Jessica never wanted her strict mother to know about her affair with a married man. Mrs. Smith, being an educator, possesses a strict moral code and won't tolerate dishonest behavior. She probably wouldn't ever forgive her daughter's actions. However, I couldn't muster a shred of sympathy for Jessica. "I'm gonna insist on apologize from you. I'll make sure my daughter pays for her sin, even if it takes her whole life. I'll ensure she fulfills her responsibility." "You've got to be kidding me! Why is this happening to me?" Ignoring the hysterical Jessica, I quietly glared at my silent husband standing next to her. "Hey, don't you have something to say to me?" As I sent a sharp glance alongside David, for some reason, he started berating me. "Jessica is a wonderful person. She thinks about the children way more than you ever did. Jessica is domestic and doesn't act all high and mighty even though she earns more than me. You're a failure as a wife." "Really? We can divorce if you want, but let me live with our son. I plan on raising him with Jessica." After vehemently berating me, my husband took a satisfying breath. While I was thinking of a retort, David, who had been standing behind me, stepped forward. "She's not a regular staff there, just an internship at the club. And don't you ever try to get all chummy with me again. Always flirting with men, it's disgusting." Just as my son said, Jessica hadn't been officially hired there. My husband always believed she was passionate and experienced in the industry involving students' education or activities, which was just laughable. Well, it seemed they both had their secrets. Looking at the stunned Jessica, I decided to give her a piece of advice before I go. "Did you know that I pay for the rent, the living expenses, and even David's tuition fees? This man, John, has been working odd jobs for years. You think he's okay?" "Hey. That's..." John, with a face drained of color, tries to interject, but it was already too late. Jessica was so shocked by the revelation that she collapsed on the spot, motionless. From what I could tell, John had been acting as if he had plenty of money to spare. He must have been hiding the fact that I was the breadwinner of the family to save face. In Jessica's eyes, I seemed like a lazy bum who neither worked nor took care of household chores properly. Mrs. Smith was left devastated, facing the harsh reality presented to her by my husband and Jessica. After David and I happily came home, it seemed John was kicked out of Mrs. Smith's house, looking defeated with Jessica and a load of stuffs. Months have flown by since the move. On Mrs. Smith's advice, I decided to leave my divorce process to a competent lawyer. Thanks to having a professional handle things, all the complicated procedures went smoothly, and I've been relieved. I heard that the savings I had set aside for David's education could also be added to the claim as a child support. As for Jessica, rumors spread quickly at the basketball club about her having an affair with a student's parent, and she seems to have been kicked out. Losing her job, Jessica sought help from her parents, but Mrs. Smith didn't seem willing to help. Cut off from all support from her family, I heard she's now lost and confused. Jessica, despising a man without money, spat out words of disdain and abandoned John. John, who has no stable income, keeps trying to reconcile in every way possible, but neither David nor I are gonna agree that. Mrs. Smith feels terribly guilty for her daughter ruining a family. I held the downcast principal's hand and was like, let's keep working together. I'm really grateful for the principal, thanks to whom I've got a new job. Work has been going smoothly, and life with just David and me is filled with hope. The job you do, Mom, is really amazing. You're the mom I'm proud of. Looking at a magazine featuring my illustrations, David smiled joyfully. Touched by David's casual words, I, who was working on my laptop, discreetly wiped a tear from my eye. I want to keep pursuing my career as an illustrator, but above all, I want to work even harder for my precious David. Don't you dare call the police. We are going to raise this child ourselves. Huh? I was shocked by what Jack said, and felt uneasy because something seemed off about him. I pretended to agree with Jack's idea for the time being, but I was thinking about something else. And then, I took a certain action. My name is Lily Sullivan. I used to be a model, but now I am a full-time housewife. I am married and live with my husband, Jack. By the way, we do not have any children. Thank you very much. Jack waved goodbye to the moving company's worker. The building surrounding us was unmistakably an apartment complex. Jack gave me a big smile and said, "From today, this apartment is our new home, Lily. The movers have brought our stuff, so let's start unpacking." Yes, sure. Jack went into the room we would be living in with great enthusiasm. Our apartment is on the first floor and has a small garden. Moreover, the interior of the apartments these days are nicely designed, and it feels pretty good. Also, the rent is cheap, and there are supermarkets, convenience stores, and parks nearby. By the way, one of my hobbies is walking. Walking allows me to feel the changing seasons, it's a form of exercise, and it helps me clear my mind. That's why I like walking. Besides, the park near the apartment is very spacious, making it an ideal environment for walking. To be honest, there's nothing to complain about. I'm glad we moved here. There is a reason why Jack and I moved to this apartment. We believe that we can't rely on pension in the future, so we decided to move here to save money for our old age. We also plan to live here when we get old, so we intentionally chose a first-floor apartment. Climbing stairs would be difficult when we get old, and I wanted to have an organic vegetable garden, so this first-floor apartment with a garden was very beneficial for us. However, the delay in our moving was due to my work. To make a long story short, I quit modeling in my 40s. I was still needed in the industry, but I thought there was no point in continuing as a model since I was already in my 40s, so I decided to quit. However, it took some time to quit, which delayed our move. For the record, I have been a model for fashion magazines since my teens and had a decent career. However, unlike recent models, I did not appear in dramas or variety shows, and even when my manager begged me, I refused. Somehow, I felt that it was wrong for a model to act like an actress or a celebrity. In other words, I had a strong desire to only do modeling work. Also, I was a former gang member during my school days, and I was worried that if I appeared on TV, my past would be exposed. I was highly valued by brands that specialized in innocent or conservative fashion, so if it was revealed that I was a former gang member, there was a risk that I would lose my job. In the entertainment industry, the image that the public has of you is very important. Therefore, I had developed a habit of hiding my past as a former gang member. Moreover, Jack does not know that I was a former gang member. He probably misunderstands and thinks of me as a pure and innocent woman. Of course, the success of making him misunderstand was due to my relentless effort. I always behaved and dressed like a lady, wore light makeup, and rarely went without makeup. All of this was to avoid disappointing Jack, and because I couldn't fulfill his wish, these actions were my way of making amends to him. To put it simply, I couldn't have children. Jack wanted a child with me, but I was worried that getting pregnant would create a gap in my work, and my body would no longer be usable as a model, so I did not have a child. Jack respected my decision, but the fact that I was making him endure it did not change. Honestly, it's a miracle he hasn't divorced me. I was reminiscing about the past and started to feel guilty towards Jack, so I took the trash that he was about to take out. I'll take out the trash. You must be tired from moving, so take it easy. Wait. I heard Jack calling after me, but I ran out energetically, reached the garbage disposal area, and threw away the trash. But near that garbage disposal area, a moving company's truck was parked. Has someone moved in? When I glanced at the moving truck, a beautiful woman got out of the seat. She seemed to be in her 20s. I was obviously staring at her, and our eyes met. And then she ran over to me. Hi, I'm Kate Grubb. I just moved in today. Are you a neighbor? Yes. I live on the first floor over there. Well, I also just moved in today. Really? What a coincidence. I also live on the first floor, but in a different building. She said that, pointed to her room, and smiled. Shortly after, Jack came running over to me. Geez, you startled me by running out suddenly. Oh. Who is this? This is Kate Grubb. She just moved in today like us. I'm Kate Grubb. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. Oh, can I help you with your move? Really? Thank you. So, Jack helped Kate with her move, along with the moving company staff. I decided to buy some convenience store sweets as a token of appreciation for Kate and Jack and headed to a nearby convenience store. Then, I unexpectedly ran into my classmate from my student days, Natalie, at the convenience store. Is that you, Lily? Natalie! It's been a while. It was the first time I'd seen Natalie since our coming-of-age ceremony. Both of us had gotten older, and our fashion had changed, but we still resembled our past selves. And when I looked closely, I saw that Natalie's basket was filled with whiskey, snacks, and gum syrup. Also, her makeup and fashion were quite flashy. Natalie, what are you doing for work now? I run a bar. It's called Bar Natalie, nearby. Come and visit. She said that and gave me a business card with the shop's name on it. Happy about the unexpected reunion with my classmate, I ended up buying a little too many convenience store sweets. After that, I had a housewarming celebration with Jack and Kate in Kate's room, eating convenience store sweets together. At that time, I thought everything was going well. A few weeks after moving, one day Jack said to me, "Maybe you should put on heavier makeup?" Why? Well, there's a karaoke place called Bar Natalie nearby, and the bartender there, Natalie, wears heavy but beautiful makeup. So, I thought maybe you should try heavier makeup too. I was astonished that Jack suddenly commented on my makeup. I was quite annoyed by what Jack had said. Bars are dimly lit, so even if you wear heavy makeup, you still look beautiful. But I don't think it would look good in natural light. Oh, is that so? Sorry, forget what I just said. You're beautiful as you are, so stay that way. Saying that, Jack, perhaps feeling awkward, hurriedly went into his room. I was quite irritated by Jack's comment. The reason I wore light makeup was precisely because Jack liked women with a neat and tidy appearance. If I had worn heavy makeup like Natalie when we first met, Jack probably wouldn't have given me a second glance. Moreover, one of the reasons I wear light makeup is to prevent people from finding out that I was a former gang member. So, I am making meticulous efforts every day to not shatter Jack's dream, but not only does he not notice my efforts, he even suggested I should wear heavier makeup, which completely crushed my pride and, honestly, irritated me. The next day, I went to a certain place by taxi. That place was a monthly rental storage unit. In fact, this storage unit contains my high school album. I go to all this trouble to ensure that Jack doesn't find out about my past, specifically that I was a former gang member. But sometimes, I want to look at the album, so I go to the storage unit. However, the lock on the storage unit was broken, and the album that was inside was gone. It must have been stolen by someone. I was shocked and stood there frozen for a while. When I got home and told Natalie about it, she said something shocking. But since Natalie and I were friends and considering the situation at the time, I thought it wouldn't be a big deal, so I kept quiet about it. About a year later, I was awakened by the sound of a baby crying. It was late at night, and it was dark outside, but I could definitely hear a baby crying from behind the door. When I opened the door, there was a baby left abandoned. I immediately took the baby in and called Jack, who was on a business trip, to inform him about the baby. The next day, Jack came home. Look, there was even a note saying, "Please take care of this child." I showed Jack the baby and the note. Then Jack said something unbelievable. "We must not call the police. We will raise this child." What? I was flabbergasted by Jack's statement and felt an uneasy premonition because Jack was acting strangely. I pretended to agree with Jack's idea for the time being, but I was thinking about something else. Then I took action. The day after Jack came back, I gathered information about the baby while holding it in my arms to somehow calm the anxiety in my chest. I expected it would take some time to figure out who and where this baby came from, but things became clear surprisingly quickly. I was able to obtain reliable information about the baby, and my anxiety was halved. However, at the same time as I obtained the information, my body was covered with an immense feeling of anger. The next day, Jack, the baby, and I were at home. Jack was at home because he had the day off from work. I was holding the baby as usual. But suddenly, the baby started crying loudly, and while I was surprised, I tried to soothe it. While I was holding the baby and trying to soothe it with all my might, Jack kept staring at us. Honestly, it's quite uncomfortable to feel someone's gaze so intensely. Even when I showed a slightly displeased expression by lowering the corners of my mouth, Jack did not take his eyes off me and the baby. What kind of benefit is there in continuing to stare at us like that? Finally, I reached my limit of irritation with Jack, who continued to stare at us in silence, and I asked him, "Hey, why have you been staring at me and the baby for so long?" Then Jack smiled and said, "Well, I was just thinking that we really look like a family." What? I did not expect Jack to say something like that, so I inadvertently asked him again. "I mean, we really look like a family, don't we? You have gotten used to holding the baby, and you've gotten better at soothing it. I think we've reached a level where it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say we're a family." It's no good. When Jack talks about the family, it just irritates me listening to him. If you ask me, I am in no way related to this baby, and I don't want him to arbitrarily make us a family in his imagination. Besides, that day, when the baby was left at the front door, I was thinking of reporting it to the police, but Jack not only denied that thought, but also left me entirely in charge of taking care of the baby. So, if the baby starts crying, I am the one who has to act first. Because Jack doesn't feel like moving for the baby, using the excuse that he is tired from work. Excuses don't work when you're an adult. In fact, as an adult, you have to think creatively and take action. Jack is the one who initially wanted to raise the baby, so he should be actively participating in childcare. But he can't do that, and even today, he just keeps staring at me soothing the baby. And in the end, he even said, "It's like we're a family," and he is such a ridiculous person who rubs people the wrong way. I wish he would consider my feelings a little and act appropriately. Despite being in sales, why is Jack so bad at reading the situation? And while I was quietly getting irritated, Jack said this. "You know, I really wanted a kid. So right now, I feel really fulfilled. Happiness might just be something like this." I was quite pissed off at Jack's remark, and I couldn't hold back my anger any longer. "The only reason you feel happy is because I've been taking care of the baby for you. This man is just too stupid. Why have I been working so hard for this man, trying to keep our marriage going?" My heart was full of regret. Fearing that I would lash out at Jack, I said this. "I just remembered something I need to do, so I'm gonna go. The baby seems to have stopped crying, so take care." "Eh? Wait, where are you going?" I handed the baby to Jack and dashed outside. And then I headed for Kate's room. When I rang the doorbell, Kate came out. "Oh. Isn't it Lily? What's the matter?" "I was just wondering how you've been lately. And I wanted to talk to you, Kate. I was thinking the same thing. It's a bit awkward to talk standing up, so please come in." "Thank you, Kate." And so, I entered Kate's house. Honestly, it had been quite a while since I had seen or talked to Kate. "It's been a while since we've met, hasn't it? Half a year?" "Yes, it has." I rang the doorbell a few times and you didn't answer, so I was wondering how you were doing. I had actually gone back to my parents' house. Oh, really? Why? Why do you ask? It's none of your business. I'll guess. You got pregnant, right? When I said that, Kate fell silent, as if I had hit the nail on the head. But you couldn't expect any support from your parents, so you reluctantly came home and then you went to my husband, the father of the child, for help, right? How do you know all that? Well, to put it simply, my husband, when he drinks, tends to spill the beans about everything at the drinking table. My friend, Natalie, happened to be at that drinking table and heard Jack talking about you. Apparently, Jack spilled everything about you that time. So Natalie told me everything. Don't underestimate the women's network. By the way, your stomach has gotten a lot smaller. Where did the baby go? Why do you ask such a mean question when you already know? You are the mean one, leaving your baby at my doorstep where I live with my children. It's not something a human should do. Thanks to you, I now have to raise your baby with Jack. Well, Jack leaves all the childcare to me and acts annoyingly paternal. It's a lie. Jack is not that kind of person. You are being deceived. Well, Jack has a good public face, and he helped you move, so it's no wonder you are mistaken. But the actual Jack is not a great person. Are you subtly bragging to me? Are you trying to say that you are happy to raise my baby as a substitute and that you are married to Jack? Of course not. I want to stop raising your baby. The reason I came here today is to ask why you left the baby at my doorstep. Hey, we're friends, right? Well, if you don't tell me, I'll report you to the police. What will you do? When I said that, Kate glared at me and was silent for a while. But I stared back without losing, and Kate seemed to raise the white flag and started talking about the reason she abandoned the baby. On the day Jack helped me move, we exchanged contact information. As we gradually communicated, I fell for Jack's personality, and before I knew it, we were in a relationship. Eventually, I became pregnant with Jack's baby, but he asked me to get an abortion. Moreover, he said he would not pay for the abortion. At that time, I was job hunting and had no savings. So, as a last resort, I went to my estranged parents' house and begged them for money, but it was no use. As time went by, I had no choice but to give birth to the baby. But I knew that just handing the baby over to an orphanage wouldn't relieve my resentment. Besides, I thought that if Jack saw the baby's face, he might change his mind and come to me. So, I left the baby at your doorstep. That's the whole story. When Kate finished talking, she broke down in tears. But I showed no mercy to her. So, basically, you're just an idiot who can't plan ahead. Honestly, I feel sorry for the baby being born into this mess. I can sort of understand why Jack doesn't want to remarry you. There's no happy future in marrying a clueless idiot. In that sense, Jack is smarter than you. But Jack is dumber than me. So, basically, you were just used by someone slightly smarter than an idiot. Really, it's a shame. From Jack's perspective, you're just a tool. A tool can't become a wife, you know. That's harsh. We won't know unless we ask Jack. I won't accept that he thinks of me as a tool. Oh, you really are stupid. Just as Kate and I were having a heated exchange, the doorbell rang at the perfect time. When Kate opened the door, there was Jack holding a baby. I wondered what he wanted as I stared at Jack with cold eyes. But for some reason, Kate hugged Jack. Jack! You came to pick me up with the baby. You must really love me, don't you? Huh? The one I love is Lily. I came here to pick up Lily. Don't get it twisted, you stupid woman. Saying that, Jack pushed Kate away and headed towards me. Lily, let's go home. It's pointless to deal with this woman. Indeed, Kate might be so incompetent as to leave a baby at someone's doorstep, but that action was prompted by feelings of wanting to get your attention, right? Well, there is no doubt that Kate is a hopeless thinker, but I also think that you are a hopeless person. Honestly, I don't even want to breathe the same air as you. So, in other words, I think you and Kate are a perfect match. The baby you are holding now has half of your and Kate's genes, right? So if you and Kate raise this baby, you can have a real family. It would be a huge loss to miss such a big opportunity, don't you think? Hearing my words, Jack desperately spat out nasty words. That's not it. I just lost my mind for a moment. I don't love Kate. The only one I love is Lily. Please believe me. Disgusting. There's no way I can believe that. You will never understand the humiliation and sadness I felt having to take care of the baby you and Kate created, even if it was just for a few days. And yet, you treat Kate like a tool, claim there's no love, but show affection towards the baby she gave birth to. You're the worst. What part of such a despicable man should I believe? Stop making a fool out of me. After being berated by me, Jack, realizing he couldn't control me, vented his frustration with these words. Shut up. You former gangster. I heard from Natalie that you were a delinquent in your school days, right? And what's with that light makeup? Trying to act like a pure, innocent model and deceive me, you're nothing but a scam artist. You tricked and made a fool out of me, didn't you? You're not one to talk. Actually, Natalie accidentally mentioned my school days when Jack, unaware that he was my husband, came to the snack bar for karaoke. But since Jack was drinking at the time, Natalie and I thought he would be too drunk to remember. Apparently, Jack had a good memory. Really, what a troublesome man. Yes, indeed, I hid from you that I used to be a gangster. But I had no choice. All the jobs that came my way were for being prim and proper, and back then, I wanted you to like me. It was a time when I had to pretend to be demure, so it couldn't be helped. You're just too lenient with yourself. Really, I'm so pitiable, being deceived by a woman like you. The moment Jack said that, the intercom rang vigorously several times. I opened the door as if to say I wanted to see you quickly. And there stood Natalie. I heard everything. You guys, the window was open so the conversation went straight outside. Well, it saved me the trouble of explaining, though. I had already sent a request for help to Natalie by text before arriving at Kate's house. I thought she was a bit late, but it seemed that Natalie had been standing by in front of the door all along. How kind of Natalie. Natalie! Thank you for coming. Who? This person? Natalie! You not only cheated and had a child, but you also stole Lily's album. You're the lowest scum. You should be grateful that a man of your level could date Lily. You idiot! Natalie cut a satisfying rebuke, just like in her student days. It was a moment when my heart felt refreshed. However, Jack unexpectedly said this to Natalie and me. Shut up! You gangsters! No matter how much you try to act like adults, in the end, both Lily and you are nothing but gangsters. Don't talk like you understand anything, you gangsters. Natalie, quite pissed off by Jack's unexpected words, crushed an empty can on the table with one hand and said this to Jack. I have a lot of juniors who are good at fighting. If I team up with them, I'm sure one day you'll be more miserably crushed than this empty can. If you don't want to make me angrier, apologize to Lily. Hey, and that woman you cheated with too. Then, Kate and Jack, perhaps not wanting to suffer anymore, readily apologized to me. After that, it was decided that Jack and I would get divorced. I said this to Jack, who was looking down discontentedly. Now that you're single again, why don't you remarry Kate and raise that baby together? You've always wanted your own child, haven't you? I don't want to. Who would want to live with such a stupid woman? I wanted to live with you, Lily, and I wanted to raise that baby with you. Jack was just spewing out selfish words, like a child. And it seems that Jack had been suspicious of me going out somewhere from time to time and had been secretly following me. So, Jack found out that I was hiding an album in a warehouse and stole the album because he wanted to know what was inside. Really, what a guy. I felt like I would become useless if I stayed with someone like him, so I quickly gathered my things and left the apartment. When all was said and done, Jack wanted to be with someone as smart as me with a title like a model, and it seems like he only saw Kate as someone to hang out with. And, given Kate's financial situation, it was clear she couldn't afford to raise the baby, so the baby was placed in an orphanage. It's sad to think that, as always, the vulnerable and children are the ones caught up in the mess of adult affairs. As for me, I started living on my own after I finalized my divorce with Jack. But, as life goes on, living costs money. However, the only work experience I have is as a model, and there probably aren't many companies that'd want to hire someone my age. So after giving it a lot of thought, I decided to go back to modeling. But it wasn't like before, no magazine covers or fashion shows. Specifically, I was doing bridal modeling and catalog modeling. However, maybe because modeling is a small industry, the photographer who took my bridal photos turned out to be friends with a magazine editor I used to work with. Thanks to that photographer pulling some strings for me, I'm gonna start modeling for a magazine again next month. Lots will probably happen in the future, but I'm not gonna give up. I want to keep pushing forward.